The ridge loomed like a scar across the highlands of Aros Prime, jagged and red against the pale sky. Wind swept the dust into coils, dancing around the armored boots of the Lari soldiers who stood in formation along its edge. From here, the view stretched for kilometers, cracked valleys, burning husks of machinery, and the last human holdout nestled in a shadowed basin below. Commander Vezir clasped his hands behind his back, posture perfectly erect, expression carefully neutral. The humans called this place Vardam's Hollow, as though naming it could somehow lend them ownership. It would be ash by nightfall. He allowed himself a tight smile. "Pathetic," muttered Centurion Alric beside him. His voice filtered through his helmet's vocal modulators. They barricaded themselves in ruins and called resistance. Vezir didn't answer immediately. He watched the tiny figure scurrying below, checking makeshift defenses, tending to wounded, oblivious to their final hour. The scent of scorched metal and ion fire still lingered in the air from the last skirmish. "Fear makes rats creative," he said at last, "but it does not make them strong." A ripple of laughter moved through the ranks. The Ilari were efficient killers, yes, but more than that, they were believers. The Dominion taught superiority from the nursery. Their blood was enhanced, their minds refined by circuits and discipline. 1,000 worlds had bowed to them. Humanity, crude and chaotic, would be no different. Scouts had reported only a few hundred combatants left in the human cell below. Their starships had been shattered weeks ago. Supplies were minimal. Surrender would have been logical, but humans often ignored logic when pride could still breathe. Vezir activated his ocular overlay, studying heat signatures and tactical scans. The humans had mounted something resembling anti-air defense, a few repurposed mining lasers, and one old turret stitched from spare parts. Laughable. "Any sign of the anomaly?" he asked without turning. Alric hesitated, then consulted his wrist pad. Still present. Intermittent surges in the upper EM bands. Untraceable origin. Probably a dying reactor. Or something more desperate, Vezir murmured. He let his gaze settle on the ridge again. No matter. Signal the forward batteries. Begin softening their perimeter. Deploy recon drones. Tonight we descend. Below, a signal flare arced into the sky, red against the sun. A small gesture, meaningless. Vezir's grin deepened. He raised a hand and made a slow, sweeping gesture. Cannons embedded into cliffs swiveled, locking onto their targets. The whine of charging plasma cells built into a crescendo. Ilari troops clapped their armored fists against their chests in unison, their war song already rising. It was tradition to offer the enemy a final warning, a chance to surrender before eradication. Vezir opened the external channel and stepped forward. "Humans of Vardam's Hollow," he said, his voice echoing through atmospheric projectors. "You have fought well. Pointlessly, but well. Lay down your weapons. Open your gates. Submit, and your deaths will be clean." There was silence for several seconds. Dust whirled at his feet. Then came a response, raw, unamplified, spoken into the wind. "You think we built graves down here," came the voice, a woman's, clipped and sharp. "But we built something else. Something that sees you." Vezir narrowed his eyes. "Identify yourself." No answer. He turned away, annoyed. Begin bombardment. Plasma lit the sky as the first salvo launched. Blue fire streaked downward in arcs, striking near the defensive wall. Smoke blossomed. The ground trembled. Yet the humans did not scatter. They held their lines. Shadows pressed against stone. Vezir frowned. He'd expected chaos. Panic. Instead, they waited. "Commander," Alric said quietly, "there's something wrong. One of our drones. Feed just cut. No damage. Just static." Vezir's brow twitched. He opened a secondary channel. More static. A thick, crackling hum. Not jamming. Not interference. Something else. He turned back toward the basin, narrowing his focus. That same strange energy signature was flaring again, brighter this time. Unstable, and yet somehow deliberate. The laughter along the ridge slowed. One soldier stepped forward, peering through magnified lenses. "Sir," the trooper called. They're not moving to defend. They're looking up at us. Across the basin, the entire human force had turned their heads toward the ridge. Silent, waiting. Vezir stepped back, just a single pace. "What are they looking at?" he whispered. As if in answer, the ground beneath their feet emitted a low, harmonic pulse. It was felt more than heard, a vibration in the bones, the suit, the chest, subtle at first, then sharper. "Check your visors." Alrek barked. Too late. A thin, web-like pattern began to form across the inside of Vezir's helmet screen. Cracks, microscopic and spreading. He blinked and tapped his command module. Nothing. The feed blurred. Warning symbols flared. "Ion backscatter," he shouted. "No. It's internal, sir, my HUDs." Another voice screamed. From along the ridge, several Lari began clawing at their helmets. The laughter had stopped. Cries of confusion filled the air. Vezir reached for his sidearm, but his fingers felt numb. A sharp crack sounded next to him. Then another. Helmets shattered. Glass and ceramic exploded outward like thin ice under pressure. Alrek dropped to his knees, blood seeping from his ears. His visor split wide like a broken lens. Vezir staggered, gasping, as if the air itself had turned against him. Down below, the human still stared, silent, waiting. And then one raised her hand. The ridge had once been a place of dominance. Now it was a grave waiting for its echo. Vezir's final coherent thought, as his own helmet began to fracture from within, was not of defeat. It was of something worse, the feeling of being watched, truly seen, and the terrifying sense that the rats had built something far smarter than he'd ever imagined. The walls of the command chamber hummed faintly with power, though the source was unreliable and the lights flickered with an anxious rhythm. Commander Mira Tran stood over a cracked display table, its holographic projection jittering, distorting the terrain map of Vardam's hollow with static noise. Sweat glistened along her temple, but her eyes were cold and steady. Everything they had left was here. 200 fighters, most injured or exhausted, a single turret, and the last working iteration of Project Glasshard. She exhaled slowly. They wouldn't get another chance. "They're moving into position," said Lieutenant Rios, stepping beside her, rifle slung across his back. His uniform was torn at the shoulder and patched with makeshift welds, but he moved with a soldier's precision. "We've got 10 minutes, maybe less, before they start dropping pods." Mira glanced at the upper sensors, barely functional, but still pulsing. The Empire had taken the high ground, as expected, typical Ilari arrogance. They assumed elevation equated to victory. She was counting on that. Tell Squad 3 to fall back to the secondary ridge blind. Get Clay's team ready to trigger the pulse when the perimeter is breached. She tapped 2 nodes on the display, steadying the image. We wait for them to cluster. That's when we strike. Rios hesitated. "And if they don't cluster?" Mira looked at him. Her voice didn't rise. "Then we die quietly instead of loudly." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face. She didn't flinch. After he left, Mira allowed herself a single breath of stillness. Her hand drifted to the pendant under her collar. It wasn't much, just a sliver of titanium from the hull of her brother's ship, lost in the first wave of the war. The Ilari had called it a cleansing operation. Mira had called it genocide. Now she called it fuel. The glass-hard device sat in the adjacent chamber, encasing coils and copper wires, humming with quiet menace. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It didn't fire projectiles or burn through armor. It sang, frequencies engineered through months of desperation, built from reverse-engineered Dominion tech. Human scientists had risked everything to develop it. Some had gone blind, others mad. It used resonance, not radiation, to target the Ilari's own enhancements. To Mira, it was more than a machine. It was a reckoning. Dr. Kalen was hunched over its core, fingers gliding over the controls like a pianist. Her face was gaunt, dark hair tied back in a tangle of cords. She didn't look up when Mira entered. "You're certain it will hold?" Mira asked. Kalen's voice was low and flat. "Nothing is certain, but I've tuned the pulse to their most common neural implant frequency. If they're running standard architecture, They'll shatter from the inside. If not, then we'll know quickly. Kalen paused. There's still time to evacuate you. Mira didn't dignify the comment. I need a field trigger. A visual one. Kalen reached under the terminal and retrieved a small object, a flat, dark disk with a red button. Its line of sight synced. Once they're close enough, hit this. You'll have 4 seconds before detonation. Mira took it without ceremony. She didn't trust the weapon. She didn't need to. She trusted the desperation behind its creation. Outside, the low thunder of enemy artillery shook the walls. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Reports streamed in. Forward barricades failing, drones lost, one sniper team already vaporized. She moved to the narrow viewing slat above the basin. Through the haze, the Alari shimmered like insectal gods on the ridge, polished armor catching sunlight. They didn't see humans. They saw obstacles. The air grew tight. Every breath carried anticipation, like the silence before a thunderclap. Mira adjusted her sidearm and stepped onto the surface platform. The smell of scorched earth filled her lungs. Her people, battered and bloodied, were arrayed behind rock and rusting scrap metal, watching her. "We've bled," she said, projecting her voice. "We've buried friends. We've counted our losses in bone. But today," she held up the trigger, "we give them something they've never seen from us. We give them fear." No applause, no cheers, just a collective stillness, taut as wire. It was enough. The first Alari pod descended with a scream, slamming into the hollow's northern rim. Then another. The enemy moved with efficiency, precision, their confidence radiating in formation. They didn't even draw weapons. They didn't believe they needed to. Mira moved forward until she stood exposed between the shattered gates. The wind tugged at her coat. One of the Alari lifted his hand toward her, a mocking wave. She pressed the trigger. The glass-hard pulse emitted no light, no noise, just a tremor, like an invisible wave brushing across the air. At first, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the Alari began to stagger. Their visors clouded, armor locked. Some raised their hands to their heads, as if hearing a sound no one else could. Others dropped to one knee. A few began to scream, not from injury, but from within. Their laughter, earlier so full and sharp, twisted into jagged howls. One fell, then another. Helmets cracked, not from impact, but from pressure, bursting outward as if the very air betrayed them. Mira watched without blinking. It was not triumph she felt, but release, like the exhale at the end of a long-held breath. Behind her, Rios whispered, "They're breaking. Commander, they're—" "Let them," she said. Far above, the ridge burned with confusion. The Empire's myth of invincibility fractured in real time. For the first time in this war, Mira saw them hesitate, and that was all she needed. "Advance," she ordered. "Make them remember who we are." She stepped forward, past the shattered remains of a soldier still twitching, his polished armor now split like a dropped porcelain mask. Around her, humans moved, steady and unafraid. There would be more battles, more deaths, but something had changed. The fear was no longer theirs. The wind was still screaming when the first Alari soldier collapsed. His armor seized mid-stride, limbs convulsing like a marionette with strings cut. The others barely noticed until the helmet split. A crystalline fracture spread across the visor in a spiderweb pattern, and then, with a sound like dry ice on glass, it burst. Shards flew outward in a shimmering arc, slicing into the air and into nearby soldiers. Blood sprayed, bright and wet against the stark gray ridge. Vezir saw it happen, and for a moment, he simply couldn't process it. Centurion Alrek was still shouting into his wrist module, demanding diagnostics, reinforcements, explanations, but the link was full of screaming, some of it human, most of it Alari. Static bled into his audio feed, rising like a chorus of broken instruments. Vezir turned to order a fallback, but his vision blurred, his heads-up display flickering as if the world around him had been poorly rendered. "What is this?" he barked, but his voice caught. His helmet. Pressure in his temples tightened. He'd felt battle rage before. He'd stood in the vacuum of space with enemy fire bouncing off his suit. But this was a wrongness deeper than fear. Across the ridge, dozens of soldiers buckled. Some tore at their helmets in blind panic. Others dropped to the ground, twitching. Vezer tried to override the sensory loop, but the command protocols were corrupted, displaying only a pulsing red glyph he'd never seen before. His mind screamed that it was impossible. Dominion systems were unbreakable. They were unbreakable. He stumbled to his knees just as a squad mate fell beside him, faceplate already shattered inward. The soldier's eyes were wide, frozen in surprise. Blood streamed from his ears, dark and thick. Vezer tore off his own helmet. The air hit like a slap, cooler than it should have been, metallic in taste. He sucked in a breath and instantly regretted it. The world tilted. Something was wrong with the pressure, the soundscape. He could hear resonance, not noise, not music, something between. It throbbed just outside comprehension, a presence more than a pitch. The kind of sound that didn't enter the ears, but vibrated inside the skull. From the base and below, the humans were advancing. No charge, no yelling, just a slow, steady walk. Mira Tran led them, calm, every step deliberate. In her hand was a small black disc, the kind of thing that wouldn't have rated notice in a battlefield report. Vezer forced himself upright, blinking through tears that hadn't been there a moment ago. His augmentations were failing. His sight had gone raw and primitive. No overlays, no scanning systems, just the smell of burning ozone and the sight of his people falling apart. The ground trembled, not from artillery, but from resonance. The Ilari had always trusted in dominance, in technology, in their engineered superiority. Mira Tran had turned that faith against them. "Fall back," he shouted, voice hoarse. "Regroup? I want jammers up now." No one responded. The command net was dead. He looked for Alrek and found only parts. The Centurion had imploded, implanted nodes rupturing outward. His skull looked as if it had been punched from the inside. Vezer backed away, slipping on a slick of blood and polished fragments. A young Ilari soldier staggered past him, helmet half melted, eyes rolling. "Help me," the boy whimpered. Vezer did not. He couldn't. His limbs were shaking now, his balance gone. Everything felt brittle, like it might snap at a touch. On the lower slopes, the humans had reached the foot of the ridge. They moved with terrifying coordination, each step echoing in the silence. Some of them carried rifles. Others, nothing at all. And yet the energy in their presence was undeniable. Mira raised her eyes to meet his. Even from this distance, Vezer felt it. Something unflinching and feral in her gaze. Not hatred, judgment. The ridge that had once symbolized Dominion dominance was now littered with broken bodies and shattered armor. The sky, once a clear canvas of control, seemed smaller now, closer, claustrophobic. Vezer could feel the pulse again, humming beneath his skin, waiting to sing once more. He forced himself to retreat, every step a battle against disorientation. Behind him, the few surviving Ilari who could still move stumbled in disarray, blinded and broken. This wasn't a battle. It was a message, and the message was clear. The humans had learned, not just how to fight, but how to target belief. The Ilari believed they were unbreakable. They believed no force could touch their neural networks, their command architecture, their sanctity of thought. But now, thought itself was vulnerable. Vezer collapsed near a transport skiff, barely managing to activate its manual override. As it lifted into the air, stuttering under the interference, he looked down one last time. Mira stood on the ridge now, right where he'd been only minutes before. Her people gathered behind her, bloody but standing. She didn't wave. She didn't raise her weapon. She just watched. And in that stillness, Vezer understood. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a new kind of war. Night fell with a stillness that felt earned. The wind had lost its bite, sweeping softly through broken ridge, carrying the metallic tang of scorched armor and the strange, ozone-sweet residue left behind by the glass-hard pulse. Fires crackled low along the perimeter, flickering light against jagged rock and shattered helmets. Mira Tran stood at the ridge's highest point, her silhouette framed by stars beginning to pierce through a thinning layer of ash and smoke. The sky felt different now. Below her, the battlefield slept uneasily. The dead, both human and Alari, lay where they had fallen. Her soldiers moved among them like shades, marking, recovering, whispering. No songs, no shouting. There was no room for triumph, just survival. Rios climbed up slowly behind her, one arm bound to his chest, face streaked with blood and grime. He said nothing at first, just stood there, beside her, staring out at the same silent basin where only hours ago the Alari had descended like wrathful gods. They didn't expect it, Mira murmured. They never do, he replied. Myra's eyes scanned the slope. Black glass fragments glinted like starlight in the dirt. Remains of helmets, weapons, neural plates, all shattered by a resonance designed not to kill, but to undo. The glass-hard pulse hadn't just crippled them. It had exposed the myth of their invincibility. That was the true weapon. The survivors? She asked. Scattered. We've counted 67. Most in shock. Their implants are dead or bleeding static. They're not soldiers anymore. Mira exhaled. They'll return. Eventually. In numbers. Rios nodded. And when they do? She didn't answer immediately. The wind pulled at her coat, and her hand instinctively brushed a pendant under her collar. The shard of her brother's ship, long lost in the Empire's first sweep. The Alari had never known his name, but they would feel the echo of his death in every resonance they couldn't control. We hurt them, she said. Not just their bodies. Their pride. Their belief in superiority. That pain lingers. That doubt grows. She turned, motioning him to follow her back down the slope. Fires lit their way, casting elongated shadows against the bunker walls and shattered barricades. The glass-hard device lay inert in the bunker's core chamber, surrounded by scorched cabling and shattered diagnostic displays. Kalen stood beside it, visibly shaking, face pale and eyes hollow. You should rest, Mira told her quietly. Kalen laughed bitterly. Sleep won't come. Not after seeing what we've done. It worked. Too well. Mira didn't argue. She walked to the device and rested her palm against its surface. The heat had faded. What remained was quiet. Still, a machine built on desperation and brilliance, now dormant, as if the storm had passed through and left only smoke in its wake. Kalen sat on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. I tuned it to destroy neural harmonics. Not minds. I didn't know the difference anymore. You saved lives. We shattered minds to do it. Mira crouched beside her. They did the same to us, every day for 10 years. They called it integration, progress, peace. They never care about our minds. Kalen looked at her. And now we're the ones who don't care? Mira held the gaze, unblinking. No, we care enough to end this war. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind howled again, higher now, like the ghost of laughter caught between the rocks. Mira stood and moved to the war table, where a single Alari data shard sat blinking with dim light. Rios had brought it in an hour earlier, recovered from the wreckage of a command node. It belonged to Vezer, he said, or one of his lieutenants. Doesn't matter. The encryption was shallow. Mira slid the shard into the last functional console. Data cascaded across the display. Fleet patterns, neural code fragments, command hierarchy trees, uplink IDs. Then a single folder, override protocols. She opened it. Kalen stood and crossed the room slowly, reading over her shoulder. Her breath caught when she saw the strings. These are fail-safes, she whispered, for the neural sync units. They could remotely burn out soldier implants in case of rebellion, but someone figured out how to reverse them, turn the fail-safes into fail-attack vectors. Rios leaned closer. Is that what we tapped into? Kalen nodded. Partially. We didn't build something new. We found the skeleton in their closet and fed it their own code. They gave us the weapon, Mira said softly. We just turned it on. She removed the shard and slipped it into her coat. This goes to Haven Command. The techs there will make sense of it, or misuse it. That's not our call anymore. Kalen looked ready to argue, but didn't. Her hands trembled, though whether from fear or fatigue, Mira couldn't tell. The sky was fully dark now, and the ridge had gone quiet again. Mira stepped outside, looking upward. Stars shone, pale and uncaring, and in the far distance, the angular silhouette of a Lari ship floated like a wound that refused to heal. "They'll come back," Rio said, his voice barely a whisper. "They always do." Mira turned, her gaze calm. "But next time they won't be laughing." He nodded. "What do we call this? What we did here?" She considered the question, eyes trailing across the debris field, the scorched earth, the armor split like eggshells. "We call it a warning," she said. "A fracture in the mask they wear. The day the gods remembered they were mortal." And without waiting for response, she stepped into the dark, into the silence, her footsteps echoing like the promise of thunder yet to come.